So thanks to a couple of people who were a little bit, let's say, loose with their NDA, we started having the unfortunate circumstance of the Ascendancy nodes getting leaked. And GGG was like, okay, we really didn't want to reveal all of these yet, but if they're all going to come out anyways, we might as well make it official, and they did, and we're going to go over every single Ascendancy point in this video. I do think that either way, it is good that we are finding out about Ascendancies, because if you're not aware, you cannot change your Ascendancy once you have Ascended in Path of Exile 2. There is no swapping to a different Ascendancy. Once you've chosen it, you're locked in. And I wonder how quickly that is going to change when they get some feedback for it. Now, as for my criteria when I'm thinking about these nodes, it's not just how powerful the nodes are, it's also how like build enabling or interesting the nodes are. So I'm super happy to see that we're getting a ton of very build enabling Ascendancies here with a lot of really cool stuff. Before I even get into this, I think all of the Ascendancies are pretty good. I think there's a couple that have maybe a few weaker nodes or maybe not that many cool nodes, but all of them seem somewhat enabling. All of them seem somewhat interesting. And I'm going to go through all of these and tell you which ones I think are good, which ones I think are kind of filler, and maybe give you some ideas on what builds that you can make with this kind of Ascendancy. So let's start off with the Stormweaver. This seems to be a pretty elemental focused Ascendancy and mostly cold and lightning. So first off, let's start with Scouring Winds. So this is this node right here. It is a 2-point node. There's no prerequisites or anything. So this just says exposure you inflict lowers the affected resistance by an additional 20%. This just kind of feels like a filler node. This is one of those nodes where if you take 3 other nodes somewhere and you just want a little bit more damage, exposure is a pretty good node. It just lowers resistances. This makes it so it lowers it by an additional amount. This isn't something that says lowers by at least X. So this is just always additional damage. Moving on to Tempest Caller, this gives us a whole entire skill called Elemental Storm. Now, as you can see, Elemental Storm right here. So Elemental Storm says it creates a stationary fire, cold, or lightning storm at a target location for the duration. And based on it saying or, and based on the highest elemental damage type for the hit that triggered the storm, it makes me wonder if you do exactly the same amount of fire and cold, if it just like chooses one of them, or if you can have like multi-storms or something like that. But the chances of you doing exactly the same amount of damage, relatively low, but possible. And it seems like this is going to be an AoE ability from what I can see, and it's also going to be a duration-based ability. Now, this third point here, which says Rain Dancer, is kind of part of this. It says Elemental Storm has 150% more cooldown recovery rate, meaning that there is some kind of cooldown on this ability. So can this be a main skill? Like, can you focus on trying to trigger this and use it as your main damage? I'm not exactly sure, but it is a crit based skill because you are going to have to trigger it with a critical hit. Now, this doesn't mean that you are going to have to always crit. This could be something where you just need just enough crit to be able to proc it every single time it's up, or at least most of the time when it's up. But if you're already critting, you probably want to scale crit anyways, so it seems like this is an okay skill. As for how good it is, we can't really know without seeing numbers. This seems like it's probably going to be something similar to maybe like Rain of Arrows was in PoE 1, where it kind of just like rains down, you know, targeted hits or AoE hits of something. That's kind of the vibe that I get from this. It's probably just a good extra ability that'll give you some good damage with whatever skills that you're running, but of course you're going to have to be an elemental build, cold, fire, or lightning, and these two nodes are 2 and 3, so these are 2-point and 4-point nodes. You're going to, of course, have to get Tempest Caller first and then Rain Dancer behind it. Now, Heavy Snows, this node right here, is going to be our first of the elemental ailment nodes. Now this says targets can be affected by 2 of your chills at the same time, and it says your chills can reduce action speed by up to a maximum of 35%. I'm assuming here that most likely, since it says can be affected by 2 chills at the same time, that there's potential for these to stack. 70% action speed slow is actually kind of insane, so I'm sort of hesitant to think that this is actually something that exists, but knowing how GGG's kind of going about like ailments and how they affect enemies in PoE 2, I could see this happening. Also, it's probably going to be really hard to get 35% slow on bigger bosses or stronger enemies, especially with 25% less magnitude of chill you inflict. I think this is going to be a good node for people who are either wanting to consume chills, where you can have multiple chills on the same enemy. It also seems like it's probably going to be very good for very hard hitting cold damage builds. You should be able to get really high amounts of chill on enemies, slow them down a ton, and probably keep yourself relatively safe in that regard. Then on top of this, we have 5, which is Shaper of Winter, just means all damage from hits contributes to chill magnitude, meaning that if you're doing 3 different types of elemental damage, all of it can chill at the same time. So if you're wanting to do some kind of like elemental storm build where you just go fire, cold, and lightning, you can make it so that all of that damage can apply to chill. It can increase the effectiveness of your chills, both of your chills that are going to be on one enemy, and then you can consume them in various ways. Now, these 4 and 5 are 2 and 4 point nodes. You're going to need heavy snows to be able to get Shaper of Winter, so do keep that in mind. You're going to have to very heavily invest into chill-based builds. So if you're not doing some kind of combo where you're consuming a chill, it's probably going to be a pretty hard ask to use 4 points for that. Next, it's going to be a very similar set of nodes. You can see here in 6 and 7. This is the shock version of essentially the last 2 that we just looked at. So this says that targets can be affected by 2 of your shocks at the same time, meaning that they're going to be able to take even more increased damage, but it does mean that it has 50% less shock duration. So you're most likely going to want to hit relatively hard with your shocks if you're going to take this node, or you're going to want to be consuming them extremely quickly because 50% less shock duration is going to make it pretty hard to keep those up. And then of course, Shaper of Storms, all damage from hits contributes to shock chance. And as I said before, these are 1, 2, 3, 4 point nodes, and you're going to have to go 4 points into this. You'll be investing pretty heavily in shock here. Next on the list is going to be 8 and 9. These are Arcane Surge nodes. So 8 here says you have Arcane Surge, just means you always have it no matter what. Arcane Surge this time around grants 10% more cast speed and 20% more mana regeneration rate. This is most likely going to be extremely good for things like Archmage builds or builds that do want to have a lot of cast speed or struggle with their mana costs. On top of this, you can kind of see here that with Force of Will, it seems like this is intended to be an Archmage kind of thing. 1% increased effective Arcane Surge on you per 15 maximum mana. I think that there is a pretty big chance that it is intended that you can play an Archmage style build on this Ascendancy. So if you were going to play something like an Archmage build on this character, you could probably take these 2 Archmage nodes. They seem really super strong for that. It's Arcane Surge, which is cast speed and mana regeneration rate, both really good for Archmage, as well as just increased effect of that Arcane Surge. And then you could decide if you wanted to take like double shocks, meaning that since you're hitting so hard with lightning damage anyways, you could just have 2 shocks on the target at the same time. And then on top of that, you could choose like a little bit more damage or a defensive node, or you could choose to just go all the way into the elemental storms and have your mana recovery here be kind of a defensive offensive hybrid layer, and then just some elemental storms on top of that. So you've got a couple of options. Realistically, you also could just take both of these chill nodes and then go for all of your damage being able to chill. All that lightning damage will contribute to the chill, give you a good defensive layer, and maybe you could make some kind of combo where you're consuming chills on the enemy. We'll have to see more of the skills, more of like the items and such and everything that's available, but a couple of really good options for an Archmage type build. So overall, if I'm rating all of these abilities, I think 1 and 10 are kind of filler nodes. You just take these if you want to. These are obvious Archmage nodes. Like these are extremely powerful for an Archmage build. You definitely would take these on an Archmage build. These seem like something where once we know the numbers of them, if they are good, it could be pretty build enabling. It could be like an automatic take if those numbers are good. If you have some kind of combo that you want to run that requires you to say use lightning damage but use some kind of chill consuming effect, or use cold damage and use some kind of lightning consuming effect, these will probably be super strong, these down here. As for the nodes before them, if you're already doing chill, you're already doing shock, they seem like relatively powerful nodes. So overall, it seems like a pretty good Ascendancy, seems like it has some pretty good options. The options are heavily going to depend on whether or not these storms are very good, but an Archmage build absolutely should be super powerful in this. Next up is going to be the Chronomancer. When I first saw this Ascendancy, I thought it looked really cool. The more that I'm looking at it, I'm slightly worried about this Ascendancy just because I did not realize Ultimate Command, this grant skill time freeze, is locked behind Footprints in the Sand, which is Temporal Rift, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So I think the major strength of this Ascendancy is going to be these cooldown nodes. So these nodes right here, 1 and 2, which are going to be these nodes here. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4 points. These 2 nodes seem extremely powerful to me. Skills have a 33% chance to not consume a cooldown when used, and grants skill Time Snap. Manipulates time, resetting the cooldowns of your other skills. In PoE, typically if a skill has some kind of cooldown, the power of the skill is affected by the fact that it has a cooldown, meaning that it's going to be significantly more powerful, whatever that is. A 33% chance plus just being able to reset all of your cooldowns at once, where you could have a bunch of extremely powerful skills that interact with each other extremely well, that you could chain off of each other super easily by going off of this 33% chance. And then if you use all of them up and you've no longer gotten any procs, then you can use Time Snap to get them all back. You could also use this Time Snap ability as kind of like a get out of jail free type card. Like if something really bad happens and you don't have an ability to deal with it, you can Time Snap and immediately have that ability back. Do whatever you got to do, survive, kill, freeze, whatever it is that you're trying to do with it. Seems like a super powerful 2 points on this Ascendancy. But then unfortunately we get down to Ultimate Command and Footprints in the Sand. I personally think that Time Freeze is super cool. I think this is a super interesting node. The problem that I have with it is just that it is gated behind this node right here. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4. So Time Freeze. Time Freeze says that releases a large wave that stops time for all affected enemies for a duration. The duration is lower the more times the enemy has had time stopped for them. This seems like it has diminishing returns on bosses. So the idea here is that you can use it and it'll be super powerful the first couple of times, but if you take too long, you're essentially not going to be able to abuse this skill, because from what I'm seeing, this says resetting the cooldown of your other skills. These 2 abilities should be affected by this. So if you grabbed all 4 of these, you should be able to reset Time Freeze and reset Temporal Rift. So it seems like they don't want you to be able to just perma spam this constantly forever. They're making it so that you can't do a build where you just stack a bunch of cooldown reduction and cooldown manipulation and just permanently freeze things forever. So yeah, eventually they stop working. But this seems super useful. It should be interesting on bosses, interesting on like getting in these big packs of mobs and keeping them in place, being able to use huge cooldowns to kill them. All super cool. Problem I have with it is that it's locked behind Temporal Rift. Now, Temporal Rift is a skill from PoE1, and this skill was basically completely ignored because it's just not really a useful skill most of the time. When I look at this ability, it's almost exactly like it was before, and my gut instinct is that Temporal Rift is just not that good, even in PoE2. Going off of how different the gameplay feels, I still just don't really feel like it's going to be good. It feels like Time Freeze is going to have to be extremely powerful to be worthwhile, because you're essentially spending 4 points for it. And I think Temporal Rift is okay, and I think it will have more use in a game like PoE2. Also, it's just a spell and it's not an aura that you have to reserve, so that gives it a little bit more room to be able to be used. But I am kind of hesitant about these 2 skills. These seem like, because of the way that they're layered on the Ascendancy, these seem like some of the weaker points that I've seen so far. But that all depends on like the cooldown of these skills, how powerful the Time Freeze actually is. We need to see numbers here, but I'm kind of hesitant on them. Next up, we have this 2-point Ascendancy, which is going to be Quicksand Hourglass. This is a pendulum type ability. Every 12 seconds, gain 50% more cast speed for 4 seconds. So this has 33% uptime. Now, pendulum abilities in general in Path of Exile have kind of always been one of those things where you just kind of take them if you have to, if there's nothing else. Defensive pendulum abilities are really bad, but offensive pendulum abilities can be okay, especially in Path of Exile 2, where you're probably going to be spending a lot more time focusing on large combos that you're only going to do occasionally. You could wait for this and then like line up a stun window on a boss or some kind of like period where we're going to be doing a lot more damage and focus all of your big cooldown casts into this 4 seconds. That could be something interesting that you could do here, and it is only a 2-point and there's no prerequisite, so I think this could be powerful in some builds, but I'd say it's probably like a middle of the road node most likely. However, this node, Apex of the Monument, this is a also 2-point node that you can see here. This one seems super powerful for me just generically. Enemies in your presence, which typically means on your screen, are slowed by 20%. 20%, I'm assuming that's an action speed slow, so that means their casting, their movement, their attack speed is all slowed by 20%. That seems really powerful to me. Pretty good defensive node, especially in PoE2, where you're going to need to be dodging boss abilities, dodging, everything that's being thrown at you. You're not really wanting to get hit all the time. More of an action style game than just like a spreadsheet style game. I think nodes like this are insanely powerful, and you shouldn't underestimate this at all. Almost, I feel like this is a take on pretty much every single build that you go on here, unless there's something like some really crazy combo that you get through these kind of abilities here. This just seems really insane. Honestly, it feels like it just makes the game easier. Crazy node, in my opinion. And then we get down to Circular Heartbeat and the Rapid River. These are a 4-point combo, so 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know how I feel about these yet, and the main reason is because of this line right here where it says recoup effects instead occur over 4 seconds. As far as I'm aware, in PoE 1, recoup is already 4 seconds, so I looked around a little bit. I spent like 5 or 10 minutes trying to figure this out. I couldn't find a source for this. I have no idea how long recoup takes right now. It could be 5, 6, 8, 10 seconds. I really have no idea. The longer that recoup is, the less useful this node is and the more useful this node is. However, spending 4 Ascendancy points to get 30% of your damage taken recouped as life, and then that recoup happening over 4 seconds, seems a little rough to me. If normal recoup is like 5 or 6 seconds, this is a definite, very good 2 points to take. I'm not so sure about the 4 point here. In general, I feel like if you're going to go some huge kind of cooldown based build, I feel like 1, 2, like these two are a given, obviously super powerful. And then maybe you take like either 6 or 5. And then if you have 1 point left, you go for like the 30% recoup. So you go like 1, 2, 6, 7 could be something that you could do. Or if the recoup is a really long time, like it's 10 seconds or something crazy like that, you could go 1, 2, 5, 6, or 6, 5, either or. Get these 2 extremely powerful cooldown based nodes, and then get like more cast speed so that you could have that crazy window where you just spam a whole bunch of really powerful spells all at once, and then, you know, slow the enemy a ton as well. I'm not big on 4 or 3. I think these would need a very specific use case, the Temporal Rift and Time Freeze. As cool as Time Freeze is, Temporal Rift does not feel that cool to me. I hope to be wrong here, and I could very well be wrong if the cooldowns on these is not super huge, and obviously you can get some cooldown, you know, like shenanigans here. There is a chance that it could be useful to go all 4 of these, but I really feel like it's 1, 2, and then like 5, 6, or like 6, 7 or something like that. Overall, I think this Ascendancy could be relatively powerful. It seems like a lot of different build types could come from this. But I do feel like this is a cooldown-based Ascendancy. You're really going to be manipulating cooldowns specifically, is what it feels like. 1 and 2 just absolutely feel like a gimme, so it's kind of my feelings on this one. Next, we've got the Titan. This is the big boy. If you're wanting to play a build that has like just a really big two-handed, huge slam, or you're wanting something where you're going to use a 2-hand and a shield with that 1 keystone, this probably seems like the Ascendancy you're going to choose. So going down the list, we have Stone Skin here, which is just going to be a 2-point node. It's got 1, 2 here. This kind of seems like a filler node to me. If you are scaling armor on your build, or you have some kind of really crazy body armor that just gives you a ton of armor, seems like a good filler node if you need a little bit more defenses. And then we have 2 and 3. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. These are slam nodes. So the first one here is Earthbreaker. 20% chance for slam skills you use yourself to cause aftershocks. So aftershocks are bursts of area damage that occur after the initial impact. If not otherwise specified, the aftershock will deal the same damage as the initial impact. So if you're doing like a fire slam build, aftershocks should do fire damage. Now keep in mind these are area damage, so most slams are going to be area slams, I would assume. With it being a 20% chance and you probably only doing like a slam every 2 seconds or like 1.5 seconds or something like that at most, you're not going to see these super often. However, this Ancestral Boost, this is an interesting node because it says every second slam skill you use yourself is ancestrally boosted. 20% more damage and 20% more area of effect. This is every other slam no matter what. So essentially this is just 10% more damage flat, which is okay. It's not amazing, but area of effect is also going to be really powerful in PoE 2 because you're going to want to be able to hit lots of enemies at once because of how the combat feels. So overall, I'm not like super impressed here, but I do think these nodes will generally be good if you are playing a slam build. Like they're probably a safe pick. However, let's move on to 4 and 5. These are 4 points here. The first one is carry a chest which adds 20 inventory slots. This is fun. This is interesting. Like having an additional 20 inventory slots is definitely pretty cool, but I don't think there's a huge reason to ever take this besides the fact that what I think is one of the most ridiculous Ascendancy passives that I think I've ever seen. The fact that this is behind it, I kind of like the fact that they put such an insanely strong node here behind just kind of a cool node. You are essentially paying 4 points for 50% increased effect of small passive skills. This is nuts, if I'm gonna be real with you. Because if you imagine that you have like, I don't know, 80 small passive skills, you are essentially getting 50% increased effect of 80 passives, whatever that might be. If on average you get 3%, I don't know, damage per each of those, that's what, 240% increased damage, and you get 50% increased effect of that. So this is essentially like 120% increased damage, but it also affects defensive nodes. It also affects everything, right? This is a crazy node. I was super shocked when I saw this node because that's a super, super powerful effect. But do remember, it is a 4-point ascendancy, so I think it's pretty well budgeted for being a 4-point ascendancy, because this is just kind of a meme. Like, it'll be nice, but it's kind of a meme. Now, moving on to 6 and 7, another 4-point ascendancy here. So first off, we've got your hits are crushing blows. Crushing blows cause a heavy stun on enemies that are primed for stun. Essentially what this means is that you just have 20, 30, 40, or 60% less stun needed to heavy stun enemies. What a heavy stun is that bar that's underneath the health bar of the boss, where you're kind of slowly building it up and then the boss is just like knocked over on the ground for like 3 or 4 seconds. That's what a heavy stun is, as it says here. I think that in this ascendancy, 6 and 7, I think these are the most powerful nodes in the entirety of the ascendancy. Just the fact that it makes those stuns happen more often and you get 40% more damage against heavy stun enemies. There will most likely be a slam archetype build where you focus on building up the stun bar to heavy stun on like bosses and such, and then during that period you cast a whole bunch of really strong cooldown abilities, lots of buffs, lots of like big hard hitting abilities, slams, whatever it might be, and you just do a ton of damage during that stun, and then you focus almost the rest of your time entirely on just building up stun constantly. There is a lot of stuff that allows you to influence how often you stun enemies in Path of Exile 2, and it really does seem pretty powerful. I think these 4 points are really, really strong in this ascendancy, and you should almost always consider taking these if you're doing any kind of stun. And then lastly, we have Mysterious Lineage. This is just 15% more maximum life, a really, really strong generic node. 15% more maximum life. It is a 2-pointer with no prerequisite. Just a very strong filler node. As for like what I think that you should do with this ascendancy, most likely on this ascendancy, you're either going to play some kind of very big hard hitting melee ability or slams, but a lot of the time slams are just big hard hitting melee abilities. In my opinion, it's very hard to not take these stun nodes. Like if you are going any kind of build with any kind of damage that can influence stun very well, you should absolutely take these notes. They are insane. As for a build that I'd probably play with this, most likely I'd play some kind of stun-based build is what I would do here. I would go like a big 2-handed weapon of some sort. I would take 6 and 7, absolutely. And then depending on how good the small passives are, how effective they would be for my build, I'd almost assuredly take 4 and 5. But if the small passives weren't that good, I'd probably say if I was playing a slam build, I'd take 2, and then I would see how useful 3 is. And if 3 wasn't super useful, I'd choose 1 or 8. Probably 6, 7, 8, 2 is what I would choose. If the small passes are effective, it would just be 4, 5, 6, 7, like super duper powerful. If you are not playing a stun-based build here, which if you're a Titan, I feel like you should play a stun-based build, you would almost assuredly go 4, 5. And then if you're slams, you could go 2, 3. And then if not slams, you could go like 1, 8. Probably what I would do. But if I haven't said it enough times, play a big hit hard build, go stuns, and take these 2 nodes. It just seems better than anything else on this ascendancy. All right, so next up is going to be the Warbringer. This is kind of like a tanky totem block kind of ascendancy. It also has some Warcry stuff. I'm not a huge fan of this one, and I haven't really dove into this one too deeply because a lot of the themes here I'm not super hyped about, I guess you could say. But let's go ahead and take a look at some of the nodes. So 1 and 2, these 2 nodes are a combo, so 1, 2, 3, 4, meaning that 1 is required to get 2. Breaking armor is interesting because there are a lot of enemies in Path of Exile 2 that do have armor that needs to be broken. This is a very, strong mechanic on enemies that have armor. However, once that enemy's armor is broken, this isn't that super useful. However, when you add it with number 2, imploding impacts, where it says you can break enemy armor to below 0, I feel like if you're using a skill that breaks armor anyways, it makes a ton of sense to go 1 and 2 here. Not really much of a reason to ever go 1 without taking this one as well. Next is going to be Jade Heritage. This is a 2-pointer here, as you can see. This is one of those skills where it doesn't seem super useful unless you are someone who struggles with being able to kill bosses and like avoid abilities. So when I read this ability, it says consumes all stack of jades to grant a buff for a duration that absorbs all damage from hits up to a maximum based on the amount of jade consumed. So when it says up to a maximum, is it a maximum amount of time? Is it a maximum amount of damage? We don't have a ton of information. I'd be curious to see how powerful this is. If it is like a super large amount of damage for like 3 or 4 seconds and you can end it early because it says while encased you cannot move or perform actions, it seems like it could be pretty strong, but this is a one-off. I feel like you only really take this if you have nothing else to take on the Ascendancy and you're just looking for a I want to get out of jail free card that you can use occasionally. Otherwise, not really super interesting to me. Next is going to be 4 and 5. This is a 4-point Ascendancy. It's going to be Grand Skill Ancestral Spirits. This seems that whenever you spawn a totem, it just says totems, you'll spawn an Ancestral Spirit minion. Now, as for how this minion works, how the damage of it scales, does it scale with minion damage? Does it scale with totem damage? Does it scale with both? This could be pretty interesting because it makes it so that your totems aren't locked in place, I guess you could say. If it does the same damage that your totems deal, it does the same effect that your totems deal, it's just a minion that walks around and does it instead, that seems pretty powerful. And then the skill that's behind it, which is Wooden Wall, is just 20% of damage from hits is taken from your nearest totem's life before you. Just a good defensive buff, especially if totems are very easy to replace and have a good amount of defenses. Seems pretty solid. Next 4-pointer is going to be here, 6 and 7. It's going to be Renly's Training, which gain 40% base chance to block from equipped shield instead of the shield's value. This is most of the time pretty useful, especially for shields that don't have a lot of base block. If you're using like a unique shield that has very low block, this essentially just gives you a huge block base to work with that can be then affected by, you know, other items or skill tree passives or things like that. And then Turtle Charm is kind of interesting because this is 35% less block chance, so you just lose 35% of all of your block chance. This is can block damage from all hits while shield is not raised. Now it says while shield, so I'm assuming you need to have a shield equipped to be able to block here, but I would say that potentially if there is a way to block without a shield in some way, that maybe there's something interesting that you could do here. You will lose a lot of your block chance, so you'll need to scale quite a bit of it, but not needing to raise your shield means that you'll be able to do essentially whatever else you want at that time. This is an interesting node, but we really need to see more of what the game has to offer before this can really like reveal its true power, in my opinion. Last 2 nodes are 8 and 9. These are Warcry nodes. I'm not a huge fan of Warcries in general, but these 2 nodes do seem pretty powerful. You'll see they are a 4-pointer again. This is corpses in your presence explode when you Warcry, dealing 25% of their life as physical damage. Once again, in your presence is like the screen, essentially. That's pretty crazy. And then 9 is ignore Warcry cooldowns, meaning that you can essentially, as far as I can tell, just spam as many Warcries as you want. There's a lot of potential here for this to be insane. As for how good it's going to be, how good Warcries are going to be, haven't looked into it that deeply, but this does seem like a very insanely powerful combo. As for a build that you could play with this, I do think that most likely this is kind of meant to be a tanky, like slower build where you're using totems and you're trying to use a shield and you're trying to just stay alive and not really worrying about doing too much damage. I do think there's some interesting stuff here that you could do with, say, a one-hander and a shield, as well as some melee totems and things like that. You could probably play some kind of slam build. You could probably play some kind of melee build. In general, I feel like if you're playing a totem build, you absolutely go Answered Call. This is almost assuredly going to be good for totem builds. Whether or not you take Wooden Wall is kind of up to you. But beyond that, if you're using a break armor skill, these are definitely strong. If you're using a Warcry ability, these are absolutely super strong, especially if Warcries end up being good. They probably will be. And then beyond that, I would probably take like Jade Heritage if you just want a get out of jail free card, or some of the block stuff down here, because this first one seems pretty strong and it can allow you to use a shield that doesn't have like a huge block chance and still get a ton of block out of your character. Overall, I'm not going to give too much of a rating on this one. It seems like it has some potential power here. I'm not too excited about this one in general. Totems and Warcries are not something that I personally care about that much, but if you do, it does seem like there's some pretty interesting things here, some pretty unique utility-based things here, like being able to just spam Warcries seems pretty insane to me, honestly. So I do think there's some stuff here, but Not really my cup of tea. Next one is the Deadeye. This one is honestly pretty copy pasted from PoE1. There's not a ton of differences here. So let's just go ahead and go over the abilities here. So 30% chance that if you would gain frenzy charges, you instead gain up to your maximum number of frenzy charges. This is a 4-point ability here between 1 and 2. And it says benefits from consuming frenzy charges for your skills have 50% chance to be doubled. As you can kind of see, the whole purpose here of these two nodes, Avidity and Thrilling Chase, is that in PoE2, you're going to be spending your charges a lot more frequently. They're not just something that you gain on your character and then they're just a buff. You really are going to be spending them on skills. These two seem super powerful in that regard. You're going to gain a lot of charges and they're going to be very effective. So this does seem pretty strong. Moving on to 3, which is Eagle Eyes. You have no accuracy penalty at distance. Depending on how far at distance is, this could be pretty good. If you're typically staying pretty far away from enemies, 2 points for essentially just ignoring accuracy seems really super strong to me, especially if you're typically at distance. And then we have this 4-pointer here, which is kind of like a hybrid ascendancy now. It's like a 4A and 4B. So you can choose, from what I can tell, between point blank and far shot. Point blank, do more damage up close. Far shot, do more damage at range. Very similar to PoE1. You're just doing more damage if it's far away or doing more damage if it's up close. It seems to be about 20% more damage with hits. Point blank seems to be at 3.5 meters. So I would maybe assume that at distance is somewhere between 3.5 and 7 meters. That's what I would assume. So in general, it really depends on how your build works. But if you're going to be far away, probably choose far shot. If you're going to be close up, probably choose point blank. As for the node that comes after it, which is 5, this is skills, fire, and additional projectile. Just honestly a really good node. Like, there's not much to say there. Most of the time an additional projectile is pretty powerful. If you're playing a skill that shoots projectiles in a barrage, that means that you get an additional hit. If you're playing a skill that shoots them in kind of like a fan, that means that you're getting more clear. Overall, just kind of powerful. Most likely, if you're taking point blank or far shot, you're probably taking this unless you really only care about one projectile. Next is another 1-pointer, which is going to be called shots. You can apply an additional mark. This seems kind of insane, if I'm going to be honest with you. Like, in PoE1, the equivalent of this was just that you got like 75% increase effect of your mark. Just the fact that you can apply an additional mark, meaning that you can have 2, is pretty insane for 2 points, if I'm going to be honest with you. And then lastly, we have a 4-pointer with Tailwind. So we have Gathering Winds and Wind Ward. Potentially not as good as it was in PoE1, because it says gain Tailwind on skill use, and it says lose all Tailwind on hit. As you can see down here, it says Tailwind is a stacking buff, which increases 1% movement speed, 3% increased skill speed, and 15% increased evasion rating per stack for 10 seconds, and you can have up to 10. So realistically, this just kind of works how Wind Ward does in PoE1, where you just lose all the stacks if you get hit. Tailwind just flat works that way now. On one hand, it makes me think that these nodes seem kind of okay. It really depends on like how much evasion you can get, how easy it is to get, say, if there's spell dodge or a way to like block spells, avoid spells or anything like that, because it just says whenever you get hit, which makes me think that this is spells or attacks or anything else. It's seeming like you're not going to spam abilities as quickly in PoE2 as in PoE1. I wonder how hard it's going to be to stack up this Tailwind extremely fast. Because don't get me wrong, 10% increased movement speed, 30% increased skill speed, and 150% increased evasion is pretty insane. Honestly, that's a lot. And most likely on things like bosses and such, you're probably not going to be getting hit too frequently. So I can imagine these 2 points together being pretty strong, because like you would have 30% less damage taken, and you'd have a bunch of these buffs. And as long as you're attacking somewhat frequently or using skills somewhat frequently, I can still see these being 2 very, very powerful nodes. If these do work pretty well and it's easy to keep the buffs up, these are almost guaranteed to be like, you always take these no matter what. If you can keep those buffs up, that's kind of how I feel about them. Now, as for what you would play on this, it's the same exact that you'd play as you did in PoE1. If you're going to play a big bow build that just uses a bunch of ranged abilities, you're probably going to be a Deadeye, if I'm going to be honest with you. Deadeye just kind of has too many good things for ranged attack builds. Kind of insane. You could probably even play a caster type build on here. All of these nodes down here all work perfectly fine with casters. As far as I can tell, there's not really any downside to that. So you could play some kind of projectile based Deadeye caster if you wanted to, if projectile hits and amount of projectiles was important to that kind of build. You're not going to take like accuracy, and I don't know how many spells there are that benefit from consuming frenzy charges. Maybe there are some, but you could probably play either or. This is a relatively straightforward Ascendancy. There's not a ton else to say here. It's just kind of like lots of projectiles, lots of evasion type stuff, lots of movement speed, lots of accuracy, frenzy charges, all that kind of good stuff. So Pathfinder is also back, and this Ascendancy looks pretty complicated, but it's actually not that bad. This Ascendancy is gonna be like the poison, the flask, and notably, it seems like concoctions are now a Pathfinder thing only, maybe? I don't think I've seen any other concoctions outside of this, but I might be wrong here. Going through the nodes, we've got 1 and 2. These are going to be a 4-point Ascendancy. 50% more flash charges gained. I would assume that this also works for charms. That's what I would assume here. I'm not 100% certain about that, but if you're just gaining more like life and mana flask charges, that would be kind of sad for a whole Ascendancy point, but who knows. And then Enduring Elixirs. This is the same effect that we had in PoE 1, where you can just have a life flask always going no matter what, essentially, is what this is meant to be. Just a very good healing node. Probably, if you're going to be this Ascendancy, you're probably going to want this. These nodes just seem really strong, especially if this works for charms as well. Next, we've got another 4-pointer here, 3 and 4. We have the most damaging poison on enemies you kill is spread to other enemies within 1.5 meters. Pretty similar to what Pathfinder already had. This is just poison proliferation, essentially. And notably, this is potentially a lot stronger because you can't have as many poisons anymore, so most likely individual poisons are going to be doing significantly more damage, so taking that one poison to other enemies is a pretty strong effect. And then following that, it's got double the number of poisons you can inflict on enemies and less poison duration. Now, notably, it says double here, so I think the intention is that you are going to be stacking the amount of poisons that you can get on an enemy, because if it was just 1 or if it was just 2, this would just say like +1 or +2, right? But it does say double, so I think it is intended there's going to be some ways to stack a bunch of poisons, so I'm not 100% certain how easily you can scale poison duration, but this is potentially a pretty big downside here. It shouldn't be too bad, because I don't think you're meant to get like 100 poisons like you were before. You're probably only meant to get a few of them, so this is probably not too bad. Then this next kind of, I don't even know what you want to call this 5-point for 1-point Ascendancy has 5 different kinds of concoctions here. And this is interesting because I feel like it allows you to kind of choose a type of damage. Like, you don't necessarily have to go poison if you don't want to. You could go some other kind of concoction, even a bleeding concoction, which is super weird. But depending on the numbers of these could be good, could be bad. I think this is intended to be like one of your main abilities if you do choose it, which is kind of interesting. I don't know how to feel about this because we just don't have the numbers. We don't know how good poison is. We don't know how good bleed is. We don't know how good any of this stuff is, right? Like, we have no idea. So this could be good. It's probably meant to be completely built around, like you just play a concoction build is most likely what I would assume, but let's keep going. We have a 2-pointer here in number 6, which is just grants 5 passive skill points. I don't 100% know how I feel about this. Like, it's basic, but probably relatively strong. If you think of it as just like an entire wheel on the tree, I would say that's relatively powerful, but it's not super interesting for an Ascendancy. This, you probably just take it if there's like 5 good additional nodes that would be better than something else here. As for how often you take it, I really couldn't tell you. It's going to depend on the build that you're playing, honestly. It's pretty basic, but it seems okay. Next is going to be a 4-pointer. These are movement skill nodes, which is 30% less movement speed penalty when using skills while moving. This could be really strong. It could be very good for kiting stuff, because there are a lot of abilities in Path of Exile 2 where you can attack while moving. So less movement speed penalty seems like it could be okay, but it's going to be very build dependent. So if your build is maybe not so tanky, and maybe you can move a little bit while using your skill, you could use that. And then they have Relentless Pursuit. It says your speed is unaffected by slows. This really depends on how common slows are and what is considered a slow. Like, I would assume that the movement speed penalty is not considered a slow. I would assume that slows are probably either things that you like inflict upon yourself with skills, or things that enemies inflict or traps inflict, those kind of things. Being unaffected by something can be really powerful because it allows you to have the debuff on you without it doing anything to you. So there's probably some interesting stuff here, but this Ascendancy overall doesn't seem that interesting to me. It does definitely seem like the kind of go-to poison ascendancy, most likely, just because of how powerful poison spread and the double the number of poisons you can have. And then you can probably use some of these like kind of things as just extra damaging abilities or whatever. But if you're going to go a poison ascendancy, I'd probably almost 100% of the time assume that you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, more flash charges, life effect, being able to Q, and then all your poison stuff. If you're going to go like a concoction build, then maybe you can go the concoction and then you can just get like the contagious contamination to spread stuff, and then maybe the flash nodes. And depending on if you are like really upset by slows and stuff like this, maybe these are good, but this is one of those things where we just have to see how many slows exist in PoE 2. So the Blood Mage is kind of an ascendancy that seems loosely based off of the Warlock ascendancy from PoE 1, meaning you're going to have a lot of life-based casting, probably some curse stuff, that kind of thing. And this ascendancy is unique in the sense that it has a buy-in on the ascendancy. You have to take this first point no matter what. As you can see, there's only one entrance into this ascendancy, and that is Sanguimancy. So what this does is it gives you the skill called Life Remnants. Drinks the blood of your enemies to restore your life. While active, enemies you kill have a chance to spawn a Life Remnant, and critically hitting a target spawns a Life Remnant every few seconds. So this gives you an overflow of maximum life, and I'm assuming that it also heals you as well. Now, the reason why you get such a powerful effect is it because skills gain a base life cost equal to base mana cost. You are going to be spending your life as well as your mana when playing this build, is what it seems like you're doing. Because it says they gain a base life cost equal to base mana cost, but I don't see anything here about removing the mana cost. So you've got your initial buy-in here, which makes it so that you gain a whole bunch of life, and if you are critting, which you're probably going to want to do with this ascendancy, you're going to be getting a whole bunch of life back. And then you've got 3 points here that are 2 pointers that you can choose between. We've got Vitality Siphon, 10% of spell damage leeches life, really powerful effect, like just 10% of all spell damage you're doing is leeched. We've got Open Sores, your curses have infinite duration, also extremely powerful because you should be able to scale things that say like maybe reduced curse duration, but extremely like higher effect of it. Those kinds of things will probably exist in PoE 2, so this could be extremely powerful. And then we have this kind of weird node here, which is Blood Barbs. Gain 10% of damage as extra physical damage. I know this seems kind of weird, but you can gain as anything in PoE 2. There's not those weird conversion mechanics like there were before. And it says elemental damage also contributes to bleeding magnitude. So the idea here is that this is meant to just be, you can play a spell build and you can bleed with it no matter what kind of elemental damage that you do. So elemental damage and physical damage should be able to bleed. So after you take your first point, you can take one off of any of these. This obviously seems pretty good because, you know, you're just going to be leeching his life. Depending on how good these life remnants are and how often they pop up, maybe this isn't super useful, but in general, leeching is typically pretty good. But these initial nodes just kind of seem like very build dependent. If you are healing enough, you probably don't need this. Are you going to use curses and buff them a decent amount? You probably want this. Are you going bleed? Then you probably want this. But there's a chance that you may not even want any of these. So moving on, we have 2 other choices on the side here. But realistically, you're probably going to choose one of these. So let's go with 5 and 6. This is a 4-pointer. So we've got 1% increased critical damage bonus per 40 life, and we've got base critical hit chance for spells is 15%. I feel like if you are going to go this ascendancy, you are almost assuredly going to want to be crit. That makes me feel that most likely you're going to go 1 and you're going to go 5. Do you need 6? This seems powerful. Like, definitely this is strong, but most likely you'll be able to get crit chance. Like, it's something that you can invest into. Whereas crit damage bonus is just a great thing to have because you're going to need to scale some kind of life, right? Like, skills gain a base life cost equal to mana cost. You're going to need some life. And that's a pretty big critical damage bonus depending on how much life you have. But then looking at the other side, we've got another 4-pointer here, which is Grasping Wounds. 25% of life lost from hits is prevented. Then that much life is lost over 4 seconds instead. This is just Progenesis. And Progenesis is one of the strongest flasks in PoE 1, one of the strongest items, period, in PoE 1. This node is nuts, obviously. It's a very, very good node. Just prevents 25% of damage, and as long as you've got recovery, it essentially just doesn't exist. But then this 8-point here is gain energy shield from equipped body armor as extra maximum life. The way that this is written, I am not 100% certain how this functions, because it says gain energy shield from body armor as extra maximum life. It doesn't say instead. I'm not 100% certain. The writing here makes me think that you just keep the energy shield and you get the extra life, but there is a small chance that it just gets rid of the energy shield. However, if you are going a like life stack kind of build, this seems pretty strong. So in my mind, if you are going this kind of ascendancy, you probably want to be crit. And I would probably say you go like 1-5, and then if you're doing some kind of life stack build, like basing your damage off of your life, you're going to go 7-8, because it just seems really super strong. Now, 8 is kind of a toss-up. I feel like you don't have to go this. If you are going to go, like if you are going to switch a node, it would probably be 8, and you'd take one of these 3 nodes, right? Whichever one makes the most sense for your build. That's what I would say. I would say that this is probably a more complicated ascendancy, and you're going to need a very specific build to make this work. You're going to need to be crit. You're probably going to want to stack some kind of life. You're going to need some way to recover life. There'll probably be abilities that are best for this. I don't really have anything off the top of my head. I would say that this ascendancy is strong. But I would say that if you are a newer player, you don't really know what you're doing, this ascendancy seems very complicated to me. And it seems like you're going to need a lot of specific knowledge, maybe some particular uniques, maybe a very specific build to make this ascendancy really shine. So maybe stay away from this a little bit early on until we figure out a little bit more, would be my take. Next up, we've got the Infernalist. This is a ascendancy that a lot of people are excited about, and I think this is one of the more interesting and potentially more powerful ascendancies that is out there. However, it does have some pretty big downsides as well. I know that this ascendancy looks really strong, but I want to try to make sure that you are aware if you choose this ascendancy. A lot of these skills have downsides. A lot of these skills fundamentally change the way that you are going to play the game, and there is a pretty big chance that you're going to have to at least choose some of them. So if you're going to choose this ascendancy, just be aware that there is a decent chance that you simply don't like this playstyle. I would say that this ascendancy is very strong. I would say that it is slightly risky to start it as your first build, if I'm going to be honest here. Most of the other ascendancies, I feel like they're relatively safe. I don't want to scare you away from this ascendancy, but I'll kind of explain as I go here. So starting off, we have a 1 2-point node here, and then we have 3 2-point nodes that branch off of it. So the first node here is going to be Altered Flesh. 20% of cold damage taken as fire, 20% of lightning damage taken as fire, and 20% of physical damage taken as chaos. If you know anything about PoE 1, this is an insanely powerful node, because this means that you will be able to scale more fire damage resistances, and then that means that all of the damage that you take will be lessened because of that. As for the physical damage being turned into chaos damage, this is potentially good because you will be able to have easier access to chaos resist in comparison to like armor, most likely. So this is still good, but it does mean that you're going to need to have some level of chaos resistance here. Overall, I think this is a very powerful node. You're probably going to take this a lot of the time, but let's talk about the 3 reserve nodes that we have here. So these 3 nodes each reserve 25% of your life. Now, notably, most auras in PoE 2 reserve your spirit, they don't reserve your mana, and they don't reserve your life. These nodes just take some of your life. So the whole idea here is that you're giving up some of your life for some kind of bonus, whatever it might be. And you can choose 1, 2, or all of them if you really want to, but that seems maybe a little bit rough. So starting out with the Gaze. Reserves 25% of your life and +1 to maximum mana per 6 maximum life. So if you were going to go some kind of like Mind Over Matter type thing, you would be gaining a ton of mana here. You would be taking a whole bunch of damage from your mana before life. So overall, this would probably be an okay use of your life pool, right? But you would need to be building around it a little bit. Now, as for Will, reserves 25% of your life and then +1 to maximum spirit per 25 maximum life. This seems really strong. And out of the 3 here, this probably seems like the one that's the strongest and the easiest that's just like a, yeah, I'm going to take this. Because realistically, if you have like 5,000 life, which is maybe doable, I don't know, maybe you can only have 2,500. You can definitely get like 2,500 life, I would assume here. And if you can get 2,500 life, that's 100 to maximum spirit, which is anywhere from like 1 to 2 or 3 auras. That seems pretty powerful to me. So this seems like a really good node. Yeah, you're going to lose some life, but you can probably deal with it if you have, say, like energy shield or some other way to defend yourself. But a big downside, but a really, really big upside here. As for the last one, which is Bedot's Hand, we have reserves 25% of life again and +1 to maximum energy shield per 8 maximum life. So if you're playing a build where you can recover energy shield extremely well, this could be a good way to maybe attempt to go low life if low life in some way is a good mechanic in PoE 2. Like maybe you take 2 of these because it'll put you on low life if low life is even really a thing that exists. I'm not 100% certain. But 1 to maximum energy shield per 8 life, typically pretty good, and if you have enough life, it's definitely going to be worth 25% of your life as long as you have a way to recover this. So those are all just kind of generic nodes, right? There's not a ton here. Sacrifice some life, get some power out of it, right? Now we're going to start moving into the things that will kind of affect the gameplay. So this first one is going to be demonic possession. This gives you demon form. Shapeshift into a demon, vastly boosting the power of your spells. You gain demon flame every second you remain in demon form, and it causes your life to be lost at an ever-increasing rate. Revert to human form if you reach 1 life, use a skill that isn't a spell, or reactivate this skill. What I would liken this to is kind of like Surrender to Madness from WoW. If you ever played World of Warcraft, you're essentially just going to be scaling, ramping up to a ton of damage while ramping the amount of damage that you take per second as well. Now, one thing that's interesting is that this next node here, because this is a 4-point node, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4. This next node here says maximum 10 demon flame. I don't know how to read this because it doesn't say plus 10 to maximum demon flame. It just says maximum 10 demon flame. I don't know how much demon flame you start with. I don't know if this limits the maximum amount of demon flame that you can have, if it makes it more, if it makes it less. I'm not 100% certain here, but realistically, if there is a maximum amount of demon flame that you can have in any capacity, whether or not this makes it more, it makes it less, it makes it just like static, this means that the demon flame itself causes you to have your life be lost at an ever-increasing rate. If you can get to the point where at maximum demon flame you can overcome this downside, like the amount of life that you're losing from leech or whatever else, that means that this is just a straight upgrade, right? I don't know how hard it is to hit that point, but if you can get this demonic possession to the point where it's just a straight upgrade, and you spend 2 points and you're just like super duper powerful, you can't use anything but spells, so no skills and probably no buffs unless they're a spell buff. But if you can overcome that, probably pretty insanely powerful, right? Now, as for how this changes the way that your gameplay feels, if you are not able to overcome this effect, this is going to kill you very quickly. Like once you scale up to whatever, 10, 15, 20, 100, I don't know how much demon flame it is. Once you scale up to that, I'm sure you're going to start taking a lot of damage. If you don't account for the fact that you are going to need to overcome that, you're probably going to be struggling and you're not going to be able to use this skill very often. So be very aware that if you go down this route, if you trade your humanity for power, you might have some problems. Next one we've got is 7, 8, and 9. So this is a 2-point, and then you've got 2 branching paths of 2 points as well. So this is going to be Pyromantic Pact. So it says maximum mana is replaced by maximum infernal flame. So I'm assuming that this means that the amount of mana that you have is replaced by Infernal Flame, and you'll be able to scale the amount of Infernal Flame most likely by gaining mana. That's kind of what I'm assuming. I may be completely off here, but that's kind of what I'm reading from this. As well as like seeing, you know, where it says like plus the maximum mana per maximum life and things like that. I think that's what happens here, because it also says gain Infernal Flame instead of spending mana for skill costs. And then you're going to take maximum life and energy shield as fire damage when Infernal Flame reaches maximum. But once you take that amount of damage, however much it is, we don't know, you will lose all your Infernal Flame, and then 10% of Infernal Flame lost per second if none was gained in the past 2 seconds. So the idea here is that you are probably going to want to try to stay at like as high of Infernal Flame as you possibly can without going over. I think that's the intention here. So that is a very interactive playstyle, and it's going to limit your ability to just spam skills, right? So if you go this route, you're going to need to take into account that if you spam too many skills, you're going to get a big backlash of damage. This does mean that you don't need to worry about mana costs at all anymore, and you can completely ignore all mana whatsoever. You just need to make sure that you don't get too much of it. Now, whether or not having more maximum mana actually works the way that I think it does would pretty massively affect this skill, so I guess we're going to have to see. But these next 2 nodes, as I said before, which are the 2-point spinoffs, kind of reinforce my feeling that you're going to want to try to stay as high on Infernal Flame as you can. Because it says, while not on low Infernal Flame, I would assume this means like you're 50 or above. All damage from you and allies in your presence, meaning like on your screen, contributes to ignite chance and magnitude. So this means that you're going to be able to ignite things with any kind of damage that you want. Pretty powerful effect. This was really popular in PoE 1 from the Elementalists, so it's a 2-point and you kind of have to use this maximum Infernal Flame stuff, but still a very powerful effect. And then the other side of it, it says while on high Infernal Flame, which I'm assuming is 50% or higher, you and allies in your presence gain 20% of damage as fire damage. That means that you and anybody around you, meaning like on your screen, is going to gain 20% of their damage as fire damage. That's pretty strong, especially if you're playing with like, I would assume that minions are allies, but if not, if you're playing with a friend, 20% of all of their damage as extra fire is pretty good. So this whole section is gonna massively change your gameplay once again. So be aware, you kind of have to choose between like fundamentally changing your gameplay or fundamentally changing your gameplay. So be a little bit worried that if you don't like either of those playstyles, you can still maybe play the Ascendancy, but it might be a little bit rough. And then we have 2 additional nodes here. These are each just 2 pointers, so 1, 2, 1, 2. So we've got Loyal Hellhound. So 20% of damage from hits is taken from your Hellhound's life before you. Summons a reviving Infernal Hound, which ignites enemies near it. The Hound takes a portion of damage from hits for you. The closest thing that I can think of to this is the big Guardian Ascendancy node, where it just summons like the big like radiating guy. There's a chance that this could be insanely strong. Just the fact that 20% of damage from hits is taken from the Hellhound's life before you is really strong. Depending on what else this does, it could be good or bad. Just by it saying 20% of damage taken from the Hellhound's life before yours makes me think that it's good. But if this isn't like super tanky, like if it's not able to take a lot of hits, it might not be that useful, and it's a minion, so you can't really super control it. It does say it ignites enemies near it. This probably means that if you're playing some kind of ignite build, you can consume those ignites in some way. So this can just auto-ignite things that are nearby for you, which would be pretty powerful. Overall, this is going to be one of those, like, it's probably just a good base ability, but you most likely need to be playing like some kind of ignite consuming build to make this worthwhile, unless it's just super powerful all on its own. And then last, this 2-pointer here, become ignited when you deal a critical hit, taking 15% of your life and energy shield as fire damage per second, but you get 30% more critical damage bonus. When I look at this, I think it's somewhat intended that the first line is a downside and the second line is the upside for taking that downside. However, I do also kind of feel that there is some potential for some kind of crazy build here. Most likely there's going to be some spell that has an upside with you yourself being ignited. So if you can ignite yourself and then like consume the ignite on yourself in some way, this is probably a crazy node that'll do some crazy build enabling stuff. But it's most likely one of those things you have to wait for some crazy person to make a full build out of it. So look forward to this node probably being pretty broken. But as like a first build or something like that, most likely stay away from this. 15% of your life and energy shield is fire damage per second. It's probably pretty rough. So next we're going to talk about the Witchhunter, which is probably going to be the Ascendancy that I'm choosing. It just seems like a very super powerful Ascendancy. It goes in line with the build that I'm wanting to play, which I'll talk about in a separate video. But this Ascendancy just seems jam-packed with a lot of really, really powerful nodes, especially for early on when you don't have a lot of money, you don't have a lot of gear, and you just want to kill some bosses and get some stuff done. First off, we have this Weapon Master node. This is a 2-point node. It's got a interesting effect here in 20 passive skill points become weapon set skill points. If you don't know what a weapon set skill point is, it's basically a point that allows you to swap between your main hand and your offhand. So your main hand can have points that you assign and your offhand can have points that you assign. Now, this doesn't mean that you get 20 additional points. It just means that 20 of your passive points become weapon set skill points. So depending on how important it is to you to be able to swap between your 2 weapons, this could be good, it could be it could not matter. This is one of the less interesting nodes to me. I feel like if there's a very specific mechanic you're looking to get from, say, having like a spear in one hand and a crossbow in the other hand, and you want to be able to have those specific nodes for those specific setups, this could be pretty good. Like, I don't think this node is bad, but I do think it's a little bit of filler or a little bit of like, I need a very specific thing, so I'll take this. The next set is going to be 2 and 3. These are 4-point nodes, and this is probably the strongest portion, at least one of 2 of the strongest portions of the Witchhunter, and that is Culling Strike and Decimating Strike. Culling Strike is different now in PoE 2. Previously, Culling Strike was what, like 10%, I think, is what it generally was. Now, normal enemies die at 30%, magic at 20, rare at 10, and unique at 5. So this is slightly less useful on bosses now, but significantly more useful on just general clearing. Actually, a pretty good node now. And directly behind it is Decimating Strike. Hits against full life enemies remove between 5% and 30% of life before the damage of the hit is applied. So it is notable that it says before the damage of the hit is applied, meaning that this amount of life that's removed, it almost assuredly won't apply ailments, it won't apply effects, it won't apply anything like that. It's just going to remove it before any of the damage of the hit actually happens. On average, though, this is going to be like 15-20% of every single enemy's health bar is just gone. This is going to include bosses, this is going to include white mobs, rare mobs, everything, right? It's going to be, everything is going to lose between 5 and 30% of its health before you even really damage it. For 2 points, being able to take up to 30% off the top and then take up to 30% off the bottom, that just seems pretty OP to me. That just seems pretty insane. If I'm gonna be honest with you, it seems pretty good. And then we've got another 4-pointer, which is going to be 4 and 5. This is going to be Concentration from Witchbane and No Mercy. So enemies are going to have maximum concentration equal to 40% of their maximum life. You break enemy concentration on hit equal to 100% of the damage dealt, and they regain concentration if they haven't lost any in the past 5 seconds. So looking at concentration, it says they have less cooldown recovery rate the lower their concentration, scaling down to 50% less cooldown recovery rate when concentration is 0. So if you are consistently hitting a boss, it is going to be doing its abilities 50% less. Now keep in mind, it is going to be equivalent to 40% of their maximum life. So to get them to 0% concentration, you're going to have to bring them down to 60% health and then make sure that you always damage them at least once every 5 seconds, or they're going to start regaining that concentration. But realistically, on most bosses that don't have big invulnerability phases, you'll probably be able to deal like all the way down to their maximum concentration and then keep them there for a very long time. And then the second part of the node just says deal up to 30% more damage to enemies based on their missing concentration. So if you can get a boss to 60%, it's now taking 30% more damage. Honestly, these 4 nodes just seem kind of insane, and almost assuredly, these are the 4 nodes that I'm probably going to be taking on whatever build that I play. These other nodes are cool. I might mess around with Zealous Inquisition, but these nodes just seem nuts, honestly. It's actually really crazy. Moving on, we do have another 4-pointer here in Obsessive Rituals, as well as Ceremonial Ablution, I think is how you say that. So this grants sorcery ward and 50% less armor and evasion rating. So what this does is it manifests a protective barrier which takes elemental damage from hits for you until depleted. The barrier instantly recharges to its full value a short time after it stops taking damage or is fully depleted. Now, depending on how much this is, I think this is probably okay. It's all elemental damage. I would assume that this is about as effective as the same thing that the Elementalist had in PoE 1, probably very similar. Potentially, because of this massive downside, it may be stronger than that. This is another one of those nodes where it's like, we gotta see the numbers, we gotta see how actually useful it ends up being, we gotta mess around with it. And then the second node here says, increase effect of the sorcery ward, and it recovers faster. Once we know the numbers on this, this could either be insanely strong defensively, or it might just not honestly be worth taking. If you really need a huge defensive layer, losing 50% of your armor and evasion seems like a really, really hard ask to me. Like that is a lot to lose. Half of your armor and evasion are both really, really powerful mechanics. So it's like, losing half of them just to be able to take some elemental damage. I feel like maybe if you have a bunch of your physical damage taken as elemental damage somehow, like on the tree or items or stuff like that, this becomes better. But the fact that this does nothing for Fizz, you lose part of your armor and you lose part of your evasion, it makes me think that this needs something alongside it for it to be good, or the numbers need to be pretty insane for it to be worth spending 2 points on realistically. And then the last node, which is just a 2-pointer here, is Zealous Inquisition. I actually think this is the best 1-pointer on the Ascendancy overall, because 10% chance for enemies you kill to explode, dealing 100% of their maximum life as physical damage, is kind of crazy if I'm gonna be honest with you. For clear, this is a nuts node. Like, I would potentially, if I'm doing some map clearing and stuff, I'd potentially give up like this No Mercy node for Zealous Inquisition, because 10% explodey, 100% of maximum life is Fizz, that's kind of crazy For real. So overall, I think that there's a lot of builds that you could play as the Witchhunter. Like, I think a lot of people are going to be going probably some kind of crossbow build, some kind of grenade style build with the Witchhunter, and I think that that will be good. But the Witchhunter doesn't really have a lot of things that say, like, you need to play this one build. I think a lot of builds are going to be really powerful on this Ascendancy. I overall think that out of all the Ascendancies, when it comes to early game, just like raw power, Witchhunter kind of has it in spades, if I'm going to be real with you. In my opinion, this is like top 2, top 3 Ascendancies, like absolutely, without a question in my mind. Seems pretty insanely strong. Overall, I think that these are a given most likely. These are a given most likely. Choosing one of these two sets is almost assuredly the choice, and then you can like say you want the concentration stuff, right? Say you have some other source of culling strike or something like that, right? So you take the concentration stuff, you'll probably take the 10% chance for enemies to explode, and then maybe the sorcery ward if you don't have a ton of armor or evasion, or you have a massive amount, right? Like so much that it doesn't matter. As for the weapon set skill points, maybe this is good if you have some kind of like weird hybrid build, but overall, these 4 points, I think, are the star here, to be honest. Gemling Legionnaire is a bit of a weird Ascendancy. This kind of feels like one of those Ascendancies when you look at it. It seems like it has a bunch of generic strength, but it doesn't really seem too amazing at any one thing. But one thing to keep in mind with Path of Exile 2 is it seems like there's a lot of like attribute stacking stuff. It seems like the amount of skills that you can have is pretty important, like being able to weave together a bunch of abilities. We don't know how exactly impactful skill levels are, how impactful quality is. All of these things, we really genuinely just don't have that information. So when I look at the Gemling Legionnaire, I think it seems like it's probably an overall powerful Ascendancy, but I also feel like you kind of need to know what you're doing a little bit before jumping into this Ascendancy particularly. Like, do I think you'll have a bad time if you choose this one and play whatever build you want? No, I think you could probably play most builds with this Ascendancy, and it'll probably be okay. However, I do feel like there's going to be a point where a handful of builds are found on this Ascendancy that are just absolutely insane. So let's talk a little bit about this. So we have a 2-pointer here in Crystalline Potential, and then we have two 2-pointers that stem off from this. So the first one is going to be 10% to quality of all skills. This is most likely very powerful. Quality on skill gems, we've seen a couple of the gems quality so far, and they do seem relatively strong. 10% is quite a bit when it's all of your skills. As for the level of all skills, we don't know how impactful skill levels are in PoE 2. In PoE 1, overall, they were very impactful, very powerful, and they did some buffs in recent time that made it so that even like attack skill levels were pretty good. So this is most likely very strong for a 2-pointer. And then this last one, Advanced Thaumaturgy, 30% less cost of skills, very powerful, very hard to get less cost of skills most of the time, but skill gems have 30% more attribute requirements. So this one here kind of feels like it's just you can really only take this if you're doing some of the other stuff later where you're like scaling your stats in some massive way. I don't know how useful 30% less cost of skills is going to be, but notice that it just says 30% less cost of skills. It doesn't say mana, it doesn't say anything else, it just says cost. So when you see a node that says just cost, there's definitely more here than meets the eye. There's more to think about here than just like, oh, well, my skill will cost less mana. There's more to be found here. However, for what those things are, only time will tell. Next one is integrated efficiency. This is the node. This is just a 2-pointer again that has 2 more branching paths off of it. This is the one that interests me. From what the devs have said, it seems like you're limited in the amount of skills you have, and it should feel like a limitation. Like you are going to have a bunch of abilities, right? Like you're going to be running a ton of abilities, and all of those abilities can have up to 6 sockets, apparently, right? Like you can run a bunch of stuff for a whole bunch of different situations. There has to be a reason that 3 additional skill slots would be useful. And in my mind, it's going to be something like more stuff to proc or more abilities that do particular things. There seems like something interesting has to come here from this. As for what that is, I'm honestly not 100% certain. And then we have the next 2-pointer, which is going to be gem studded. This is potentially really strong because you can use 2 copies of the same support gem in different skills. One of the big differences in PoE 2 versus PoE 1 is that Support gems can only be socketed once in your entire character. And while it seems like a limitation, when I listened to Jonathan and Mark kind of talk about it a little bit more, I did end up agreeing with them in that this opens up the game in a way that makes it so that it seems more useful to just do cool things with all of your skills. You don't always just have to be like, well, if I want damage, I use these 5 support gems. If I want utility, I use these 5 support gems. There's going to be different support gems for everything, and a lot of those support gems are really powerful. However, the ability to use them twice is potentially really strong in some very highly specific circumstances. But once again, we don't know what those circumstances are going to be. So another kind of just slight word of caution here when I'm thinking about this Ascendancy, I don't 100% know that you will want to like start this in early access as your first character. It does seem a little bit complicated in some ways. Moving on to the other 2-pointer that comes off here is Thaumaturgical Infusion. This just gives you maximum resistances per number of the support gems socketed into your build. If you can have however many amount of skills and all of them are going to have 6 support gems, you could probably get a pretty decent amount of maximum resist here. Seems like a good node, but I don't exactly know how powerful this will be depending on what your build is. Maximum resistances are super strong, like don't get me wrong, and you will be able to probably get at least like 40, 50 support gems, maybe more than that, most likely, especially since you're gonna have additional skill slots. So this is a lot, like keep in mind, this is a lot of resistance. It might be up to like 5 maximum of each resistance, which is pretty strong. But once again, I don't know how difficult it's going to be to handle different kinds of damage. We're just missing a lot of information here. Definitely a potentially very powerful defensive node though. Next, we've got a 4-point tier here that is going to be more about attributes. So the first node here says attribute requirements of gems can be satisfied by your highest attribute. This makes me think that the intention here is that you'll be able to abuse mechanics where if you're scaling one attribute extremely highly, you'll be able to make use of other attributes in the same way. Like there's going to be a lot of circumstances where something is going to require like 500 strength. And maybe you want to be able to use that item or that skill or whatever it might be, but say you're really mainly stacking dexterity. Now you can pretty much use anything you like as long as you are stacking one of those attributes, and you can just focus on stacking that one attribute. And to enhance that, 2 points later, we have enhanced effectiveness. Inherent bonuses from intelligence, strength, and dexterity are doubled. So if you are stacking some kind of stat, whatever it might be, intelligence, strength, or dexterity, they tend to give pretty good effects when you stack them just base. You get double that effectiveness. So if your entire build revolves around stacking that stat, not only use anything in the game that you probably want of any kind of stat, you also get double the effectiveness of it. Now, what kind of build would I play off of this? I'll be honest with you, this is one of the Ascendancies that I really just have no idea. At first, I was thinking that you could play some kind of like cast on crit or cast on XYZ, freeze, ignite, chill kind of build where you stacked a whole bunch of spirit and did some crazy stuff, and that's probably still true. But realistically, I just don't know. I think that you could probably also play a minion build here would be pretty interesting because the additional skill slots probably mean additional minions and you'd be able to, get like more quality and level of the skill gems. And that's probably all good and everything. So, you could probably do like 1, 2 to get plus the level and plus the quality of skills and 3 additional skill slots and being able to use 2 of the same support gem, play a whole bunch of minion builds and then stack up on all of the minion support gems that do like extra damage and things like that. That could probably be fine. And then on the flip side, there are going to be a bunch of stat stacking like skills and items and things like that. You can definitely play some kind of stat stacking build with this. Absolutely. You could go these 2 nodes, which will give you the attribute stuff. And then beyond that, depending if you need more skills, you can get more skills, you could get maximum resistances. Maybe the skills that you are running benefit from quality. You could grab something like that over there. It really just depends on that kind of specific thing. But a stat stacker, maybe a minion build, or maybe some kind of proc build would probably all work here. Now, the reason I said originally I thought that the Gemling Legionnaire would be like some kind of proc ascendancy is because I hadn't seen this ascendancy yet. And this is the Invoker, and just the word Invoker makes me think that they expect this to be the proc ascendancy. This ascendancy seems pretty busted for procs. Let's just jump right into it. First, we have a 4-pointer here, Lead Me Through Grace, which is gain 1 spirit for every 6 energy shield on your body armor and gain 1 spirit for every 15 evasion on your body armor. Cannot gain spirit from equipment. There's a lot of spirit that you can get from various places. However, this means that if you are running a giant evasion energy shield body armor, you're just going to gain a ton of spirit. I imagine this is going to be a lot. I could see you getting a couple hundred energy shield easily. I could see you getting potentially like 1,000 or more, like 1,500 evasion rating on an armor. I could see you getting a lot of spirit from this, like a lot of spirit from this. So that's a 2-pointer, right? As for and protect me from harm, evasion rating also grants physical damage reduction, but you get less evasion rating. This honestly seems really insanely powerful. It may not be necessary to take for various reasons, but like just being able to stack evasion rating and energy shield and get a ton of physical damage reduction is honestly kind of crazy, but 40% less evasion rating is also pretty crazy if I'm gonna be honest with you. So this could be good. It could also be awful. I feel like this is one of those nodes where we're gonna have to see how much evasion rating you can get. If you have 40% less, can you get to like 75% evasion still and then also get some physical damage reduction? Like we're gonna have to see what's possible, but this is either potentially insane or maybe not that great at all. Next is a 2-pointer. Faith is a choice. It grants us the skill Meditate. This allows you to channel to recharge energy shield, and you can overcharge your energy shield up to double its normal maximum. And the channeling ends whenever you either take damage or you reach the maximum. This is like, I don't know how to feel about this skill. On one hand, it makes me think that it's like insane because if there's like a boss downtime period, you could just sit there and channel for a moment and then get like an insane amount of energy shield and just do that every single time that you're worried about it. I don't know how long this channel takes. I don't know anything about this, but this seems potentially like it could be abused, but it also seems kind of annoying because you can't get hit while you're doing it, right? Or it interrupts everything. However, if you're doing some kind of like, I don't know, some like proc-based build, and there's a way that you can like cast while channeling and then you could like proc stuff off of that, you could just make Meditate like your main skill and you could just channel it constantly and it might be able to, I don't know. It seems like maybe there's some kind of weird something going on there that could happen, but I'm not even gonna think about this too much. It's just kind of making my brain hurt, to be honest with you. So let's move on to I am the Blizzard, I am the Thunder, and I shall rage. So these you can either take either path here. You've got 1, 2, 1, 2, and they both connect to and I shall rage. So starting off with 4 and 5, 10% of damage is extra cold damage, and on freezing enemies create chilled ground. Same thing with I am the Thunder, gain 10% of damage is extra lightning damage, chance on shocking enemies to create shocked ground. So the ground effects are just the same as the normal effects, except it creates an area on the ground, so it should persist as well as affect everything else around it. And then they link into this Unbound avatar, which is very similar to a skill from PoE 1. Gain Unbound Fury by inflicting elemental ailments with hits on enemies. Once you reach max, you can consume it to become unbound for a duration, vastly augmenting your elemental prowess. I am assuming that this is very similar to what the Ascendancy in PoE 1 has, where you just gain like a bunch of damage and other various things. We don't know what this does yet, but as of right now, it's probably pretty strong. We don't know what it does though. We have absolutely no idea. Could be good, could be bad, and probably pretty strong though, if I had to imagine. Next thing is going to be a 2-pointer in The Soul Springs Eternal. Meta skills gain 35% more energy. If you don't know what this means, energy is an effect that things like cast on Ignite, cast on Shock, cast on Freeze, cast on Crit, they have to build energy through hitting enemies or shocking enemies or freezing enemies, etc., etc. And when it gains up to full energy, it casts the spells that are like associated with it. They are all meta skills. So this just means that you gain more energy, period. 35% more. If you are doing a cast on XYZ build, this is nuts. Absolutely insane for 2 points. This kind of makes it so that if you're doing a cast on X build, cast on crit, cast on whatever, this is kind of the Ascendancy, if I'm going to be real. Like, this is just kind of the Ascendancy you play. And then we have another 4-pointer in 8 and 9. We have critical hits ignore non-negative enemy monster elemental resistance. This kind of fixed the problem with the Inquisitor node. It also kind of lends me to think that this is the cast on crit Ascendancy, if I'm going to be real with you. Just a very powerful node if you're going crit. Just makes it so that if the enemy does have resistances, you ignore them, But if the enemy does happen to have negative resistances, you don't ignore them, because that was the problem with Inquisitor. If you completely ignore resistance, there's no point in ever making them negative, even if you can just do it occasionally. So, and then we've got and scatter them to the winds, which is a very weird ability here. So it grants you the skill Elemental Expression, and it says trigger Elemental Expression on melee critical hit. So this is making me think that they are intending for you to probably play Cast on Crit and Cast on XYZ as melee. It says creates a fiery explosion, an arcing bolt of lightning, or an icy wave of projectiles. The chance for an explosion is proportional to your strength, same for dexterity, same for intelligence. So depending on how much you have of each, that gives you the chance to proc those specific ones. So if you're particularly trying to proc a lightning spell, you're going to want to have more dexterity in your character, and so on and so forth. I think that this potentially could be pretty powerful. We have to see what the numbers are on it, but honestly, it could be pretty good. I don't see a reason why, if you're already proccing elemental skills in some way, you wouldn't just take these three, proc a whole bunch of stuff, and probably take Lead Me Through Grace. Like that just kind of seems like what you'd do. If you don't want Lead Me Through Grace, like if you don't need Spirit for some reason, even though if you're playing like a proc-based build, you want as much Spirit as possible, maybe you could take one of these or something like that. And then I do also think there is some potential for just a very powerful like melee-based elemental attacker, where you can go for some of these nodes up here, get a whole bunch of Spirit and use a whole bunch of auras, and then do a whole bunch of extra like lightning or a whole bunch of extra cold damage, and then get the Unbound Avatar and go crazy every once in a while. I think there is potential for that to happen as well. And then if you have any extra points, you could probably spend it on like Meditate or on some of this meta stuff or whatever if you wanted to. But I honestly think this is like the cast on XYZ crit whatever Ascendancy, and you just go meta skills and you gain a whole bunch of energy and ignore stuff, go crit, all that good stuff. That's what this Ascendancy seems like, if I'm going to be honest with you. That being said, all of those things are very complicated types of builds, except maybe the like go extra damage, do extra damage stuff. So be a little bit aware. I think this Ascendancy strong, but a little complicated, and some of the cast on XYZ stuff is probably going to be pretty hard to pull off as your first character, so do be aware of that if you're going to start this Ascendancy. And I have saved the weirdest for last. This Ascendancy is very strange. I think it's designed to be strange. I could not tell you any particular kind of build to play with this, to be honest with you. I'm just going to be upfront. We're going to go over it and I'm going to give you my thoughts, but like this one's weird, okay? So this is the Acolyte of Chayula. It's a chaos-based Ascendancy, it's a darkness-based Ascendancy, and is a breach-based Ascendancy. I know that sounds weird, but let me explain. So first thing is we've got a 4-point node here. Mana Leech is instant. Any kind of leech being instant is extremely powerful. It means that it ignores all of the crazy, stupid mechanics that leech typically has, where it's like you can only leech so much off of so many instances over so much mana. You just ignore all of that. You have 10% leech, you do 100 damage, you gain 10 mana. Instantly, nothing else to worry about. This means that if there is some kind of effect that makes it so that, say, you need to spend a ton of mana at any given time, you'll be able to have almost instant full mana at any given time as long as you have enough mana leech. And then the point behind it is consuming questions. You cannot recharge energy shield, but mana leech effects also recover energy shield. So if you have a bunch of energy shield on your character, and energy shield is going to be a very strong mechanic in PoE 2, you will be able to leech energy shield constantly as long as you're dealing damage to stuff. This does make it so that you can't recharge it, meaning if you're going to go like CI or something like that and you're going to give up all of the rest of your stats, there's no way for you to heal your energy shield unless you are hitting stuff and leeching, so be aware of that. But definitely a 1-2 super big powerhouse of being able to leech energy shield and have that leech be instant. It's very powerful. Next is a 2-pointer, Chayula's Gift. Maximum chaos resistance is really good. And when it says chaos resistance is doubled, it just means if your maximum chaos resist is like, say 80 and you start at -60, if you want to have maximum resistances, all you need is 70 chaos resist and it'll double it. So an okay node, especially if you have some other mechanics that are making you take damage as chaos damage, this could be a very powerful 2-pointer. but you're going to need to invest in some of those mechanics to make this worthwhile, in my opinion. Next, we have another 2-pointer here in Reality Rending. This is the same as the old Trickster node that became the like node you have to get from Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame from PoE 1. Notoriously, this node was never really used. It wasn't really that powerful. I kind of feel the same way about it here, but maybe if you had literally nothing else to take, this might be okay. Because it's like, these are small chances to gain damage with hits as extra chaos damage. Like, I feel like mathematically it's strong. It's just there's so many other crazy things on this Ascendancy that it's really genuinely super hard for me to like say, yeah, you take this. This is a filler node. This is a backup node. If you want to do chaos damage and you've got nothing else that's really worthwhile, you take this node. Now let's move on to the breach stuff. So these are 4 points. These are Waking Dream, which grants a skill into the breach. It basically just makes it so that you're always in a breach. If you don't know what that means, there's a mechanic in PoE and PoE 2 where you are going to encounter breaches and they open up and there are specific monsters from breach that will fight you in those breaches. This makes it so that you're just always in the breach. Also, notably, there are like rings and such that are affected by breach, so you can use specific items that will be more powerful when you have something like this. And what it does is it allows you to see nearby flames of Chayula. So it makes it so that when you pick up a red one, you leech 7% of your maximum life, blue ones leech you 7% of your maximum mana, and remember, if you take these nodes, your mana leech is instant. And then purple flames grant a stacking 7% damage as chaos buff for 5 seconds and stacks up to 10 times. 70% of chaos damage. Gain 70% of damage as chaos damage. Now, as far as I know, this is a stacking buff and it doesn't reset the like timer on it, so you're not always going to be there. And we don't even really know how these spawn. Like, it doesn't really say, it just says see nearby flames. Are they going to pop up when you fight bosses? Are they just around you in the environment? We really don't know. So there's a chance that this is really good. There's also a chance that it's not that great, depending on what you're doing. And then the next node, which is the behind it node, is just that the effect and duration on you is double. So this turns into 140% of chaos damage gained, and they last for 10 seconds. So if you can get these, I mean, it's kind of insane. Let's be real. Last, we have a 2-pointer that has 2 branching paths off of it. These are the spirit becomes darkness, embrace the darkness. Remove all spirit. So spirit is the thing that you use to grant yourself buffs, to grant yourself auras, that kind of thing. This just removes all of it. So guess what? You don't get to have spirit. You don't get to have auras. You probably don't get to have very many buffs. In exchange for that, you get darkness. And what darkness does is it says for each life or energy shield lost to damage, reserve 1 darkness instead if possible. So if you have 100 darkness, that is essentially 100 extra life or energy shield that you could reserve instead. You also get 5 to maximum darkness per level. So at base, you'll have about 600 extra darkness. Beyond this, I'm not 100% certain if like increasing darkness has like if there's any other ways to increase maximum darkness or anything like that. I'm not sure, but that reservation lasts for 10 seconds. So as long as you are able to sustain for 10 seconds, you just get it back instantly with no real worries at all. You don't have to recover it in any way. It just comes back automatically. Beyond that, you have 2 points that can come off of it, which is gain 1% of damage as extra chaos damage per 20 unreserved darkness. So if you have 600, that means that it is 1% times 30. So you gain 30% of extra chaos damage whenever you haven't been hit. And then also 50% reduced darkness reservation duration. So this is only duration, meaning that after 5 seconds, it comes back. To me, this just kind of looks like 600 extra darkness, right? So I think that it's good. I think that there's potentially a lot of power here. I wonder if you can affect this in any other way. If there's like items that affect darkness, if there's like points on the tree that affects darkness. This is one of those things that feels like very much a toss-up. How much is 600 darkness? Like, is it that big of a deal? Like, I know it comes back in 5 seconds once you get to Inner Silence, but like a 5-second rotating 600 damage shield, maybe that's good. I don't know what end game damage numbers look like. I don't know what end game health numbers look like. This is one of those things where it's just like, I don't know. As for a build that you would run with this, I feel like any build that does physical or chaos damage is probably good here in some way. You probably want to be a build that can leech in some way. I feel like this is a Ascendancy that will probably be played on some kind of skill that's very insanely overpowered, and it'll be extremely broken and very strong, but it's probably going to be something to do with like this instant energy shield leech and something to do with Into the Breach. There's going to be something broken about this, but no builds like jump out at me automatically. Like nothing really jumps out at me as like, yeah, I'm going to play some kind of build for this. I tried looking at this Ascendancy a little bit, and there's not really a lot of skills that feel like they fit super well here. I don't know. This Ascendancy seems super cool. I'm sure it'll be super broken eventually, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't think you start this one. Like, I don't think anybody should probably start this one unless they have a very, very hyper specific thing that they want to do, because there's just so much up in the air when it comes to this Ascendancy. And that is going to be it for the video. Super long video. I'm not going to waste any more of your time. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, like the video if you liked it, and I will see you all later, gamers.